Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Now today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Edward Elgar Publishing Limited. They're an independent family business producing top-of-the-range books on certain legal research issues covering company law, corporate matters and intellectual property. The book that we're looking at today is the Research Handbook series of books. This one is the Research Handbook on Cross-Border Enforcement of Intellectual Property. It's been edited by Paul Torremans, and we'll have a look at the book in a minute. Now, my wife Elizabeth and I have written this review, and we've given it the title Cross-Border Perspectives on the Enforcement of Intellectual Property Rights Across a Number of Jurisdictions, which of course is a very important matter because today IP matters are not specific to a country, they are global. So therefore this is an important area of both international law and IP. This is the book. It's a heavy book. It's a hardback. There's the front cover, which you can see, nice picture. This is part of the Research Handbooks in Intellectual Property. It's got a little subtitle up there. There's the spine. Then you can see at the back quite a lot of information given. Now, in the book itself, it runs to something approaching nearly 900 pages. There's a very detailed index, which you can see there. And then, of course, behind the index, you've then got the actual articles themselves. There's a lot of footnoting, which I think is also very helpful quite often. And you get a conclusion, generally speaking, with each chapter. Again, going into it a bit, you can see more footnoting there. There are various parts to the book, for instance, which we'll go to. So if we go to the front, you can see the main area. This is the list of books within the series. Then there's the actual title of the book there. Then you get to the content section. It's split into parts. You can see the various parts listed there. And then there, 4 parts in total, and then the contributors. This is a research handbook, so there are a lot of people contributing. Then there's a preface from Professor Paul Torremans, which is always worth reading because you get some idea of what the purpose of this book is really all about. Then we start with part 1, for instance, national and regional assessments. Then it goes straight into cross-border enforcement, looks at actors to start with, and then runs through from there. You do have a little bit of paragraph numbering, subheadings and so on, but there's not very much. It's mainly what I would call body copy and then some sub-chapter headings and so forth. But it's a very important book, certainly in the current decade that we're in, where things have changed so much over the course of the last 15 years alone, since the turn of the century. What we're looking for there with the book, therefore with the book, is what value is it to people who are involved in IP and international law generally? Well, this is what we say about the book. The articles contained in this book shine the light of authority and scholarship on one of the thorniest legal questions in the global marketplace, to wit, how do you enforce intellectual property rights across borders in today's global economy? And that, of course, is the question. As the editor of this important book reminds us, intellectual property is nowadays rarely limited in scope to a single country, which indeed makes the intellectual property system international and, with the advent of the internet, borderless. This book from Elgar examines the range of cross-border IP enforcement issues via the 18 learned articles, and you've seen the list of contributors. It contains basically from as many expert international contributors as possible statements on the law as we see it at the moment. Collectively, the authors look at the various means of cross-border enforcement, or the lack of it, and the variety of issues that arise from the often diverse policies on IP enforcement that prevail in different countries and jurisdictions. And it's interesting, if you read this book, to compare both the similarities and the differences. The 18 essays are grouped, as I've said, into 4 parts. Part 1 examines a range of national and regional systems individually, and the editor Professor Paul Torremans, who's Professor of IP Law at the University of Nottingham, observes that some jurisdictions formulate and enforce special rules for cross-border cases. In developing economies, though, the emphasis tends to be on forming and implementing an IP enforcement system in the jurisdiction itself. Then goes on to part 2, which deals with traditional private law areas such as jurisdiction, choice of law, and recognition and enforcement. With part 3, it looks at cross-border enforcement from the point of view not only of practitioners, but of arbitrators and judges. And that's again an important area because of the use of arbitration internationally. Part 4, which is actually titled Special Issues, will be of special interest to practitioners and others, including the creators of the intellectual property themselves. I think especially relevant here are the chapters on IP and the internet, challenges for the enforcement of copyright in the online world, reads 1, and it's time for a new approach. And it may well be that we get to this new approach quite quickly, because at the moment, even as I record this in March 2015, there are some new cases coming up about international IP issues and infringement, and it will be interesting to see how it develops. Although obviously of direct interest to IP lawyers, you don't necessarily have to be an IP specialist to find the book directly relevant to your practice and your general knowledge of the law in this area. Take, for example, interesting observation in the book's first chapter on enforcement of IP rights under US law. The statement is made that the US courts are more willing than ever to contemplate extraterritorial application of US intellectual property and to incorporate the realities of the global marketplace. And I suspect that that is going to be something that develops probably within the EU as well. Whether that happens in the future is another matter, but at least we have the beginnings, the germination of this with this book. Despite what the writer Marshall Liaffa calls the decline of territoriality, there is apparently a reluctance in the US to incorporate decisions of foreign courts into domestic legal culture. I'm not surprised, actually, bearing in mind the fact that they should only really be persuasive in terms of our concept of the common law, but that's a matter for the Americans. On this side of the Atlantic, both pro and anti-Europeans might make much of this particular point themselves, of course, but as I've indicated, I still believe that it's only persuasive. It won't bind. As you might infer, therefore, the book offers practitioners much to contemplate on this very contemporary issue, which certainly impacts on a wide range of individual and corporate clients. So if you're an IP practitioner, you need the book in your library, basically. The publication date is cited at 2014. Just have a look at it again. I'm very pleased with the book. You can see what it looks like from the front and from the back there again. I think it's a very interesting book. It's a heavy book. There's a lot in it. Choice of law in intellectual property, right in the middle. You see, again, a very important point, because you can choose, and London, for instance, is a very popular venue for many people at the moment to sort out disputes of various sorts. Certainly the Royal Courts of Justice are. There's the index again, as I show you, and then at the front you've got some very basic information. That's actually the start, the article I referred to right at the beginning by Marshall Liaffa, if I pronounced his name correctly. But I think the book is very interesting. You can see again a whole series of commentaries. Again, cross-border enforcement of intellectual property rights in Thailand. So you see, it's not something that's just specific to particular countries. It's much wider than that. Anyway, I'd like to thank all the people involved for this book, the contributors, Edward Elgar for producing the Research Handbook series, which I think are of great help to legal scholars and to people in a much wider audience in this day and age. And I think IP issues are going to be with us, of course, for a very, very long time. And so therefore, it's something that you should have in your library. Anyway, thank you very much indeed to all concerned for an excellent publication. Bye-bye.